Do you know that no emotion lasts longer than 90 seconds? Unless you feed it. That's right, rage, fear. Even the deepest sorrow are nothing more than a chemical wave that rises and fades within a minute and a half. Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, a Harvard neuroscientist, proved this. When an emotion is triggered, the brain releases a flood of chemicals into the bloodstream. They race through your body, making your heart pound, your hands heat up, your shoulders tense. And then, if you don't pump it with more thoughts, it's gone in 90 seconds. But most of us don't leave it alone. We keep it alive by replaying the story, adding details, and turning a brief biological reaction into a mental prison that can last for hours, even years. Don't fool yourself into thinking you're the victim of your emotions. They're not judges, they're expert salespeople. And you still sign the contract with them every single day. The Stoics said it thousands of years ago. It's not the things that happen that disturb you, but your opinion about them. Modern science just confirms it with data and MRI scans. This video won't teach you cheap positive thinking. It will hand you 10 blades, 10 strategies from neuroscience, psychology, and Stoic philosophy to cut through the emotional loop and keep you standing tall even when the world collapses around you. Watch to the end. Then tell me, when was the last time you lost control, and what pulled the trigger? Comment below, not to complain, but to make your story a warning for others. And if you find value here, like, share, and subscribe to Victory Stoic, because awareness doesn't just save you, it saves the people who look to you. Let me tell you about the 90-second rule. If I told you that the fiercest anger, the sorrow that feels endless, or the fear that makes your heart want to leap out of your chest, is actually nothing more than a short chemical wave, would you believe me? A wave that comes and goes in under 2 minutes if you'll let it go. This isn't abstract philosophy. It's the finding of Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor at Harvard. She discovered that when an emotion is triggered, the brain instantly fires signals, releasing a cocktail of chemicals into the blood. They make your heart race, your muscles tighten, your breath quicken. And then, if you don't interfere, your body clears them out in exactly 90 seconds. The problem is this: humans are terrible at leaving things be. Instead of letting the body flush the chemicals, we start digging up memories, adding details, and every time we retell the story, we hit the refill button on the emotion. We think we're remembering the past, but in reality, we're recreating the present and dragging out a storm that was already fading. Think of an emotion like a stranger knocking at your door. If you just peek through the crack, they'll leave. But if you swing the door wide, invite them in, pull up a chair, pour them tea, and drag out your third-grade photo album, congratulations, you've just turned them into a long-term tenant. The 90-second rule is the art of not inviting the guest to stay. When an emotion hits you, simply stand still, breathe deep, and let the wave recede. No fighting, no clinging. Just 90 seconds, and you'll realize that what once drowned you was just a ripple rolling past the shore. Those 90 seconds are like hitting pause on a movie, so you don't get sucked into its most dramatic scene. But pausing isn't enough. Once the movie stops, you need to zoom out. See the bigger picture, not just the frame where two characters are screaming at each other, but the entire story around it. This is where cognitive reframing comes in. Cognitive reframing means changing the frame you're using to view a situation. It's not about denying the problem, it's about swapping the lens, so you can see what anger or fear has been blocking from view. For example, you're at the airport, your flight gets canceled. If you keep the frame of "I'm stuck wasting time, everything's ruined," you'll keep pumping negative chemicals into your brain. But if you switch to "I've just been given a few hours to finish that book I left halfway," or call someone I haven't spoken to in ages, suddenly the atmosphere in your head shifts. It sounds simple, but when emotions are in the driver's seat, your brain will resist every attempt to change the frame. That's why the 90-second rule has to come first to put you back in control of the wheel, so you can then steer your perspective. One of the best reframing stories I've heard came from a US Marine friend. During a training drill, he got left behind in the field, cold rain pouring down, clothes soaked. The guy next to him was muttering curses, shivering through it. But my friend thought, I'm in a place that almost no one on earth will ever get to stand in. This will be a story I'll tell for the rest of my life. Same situation, two different frames, two entirely different experiences. The fascinating part, when you change the frame, the emotion changes color. Anger turns into curiosity. Fear becomes excitement. Disappointment transforms into a game to test your adaptability. As Seneca wrote, a wise man does not complain about the wind. He adjusts the sails. This isn't avoiding difficulty, it's the art of turning the very circumstance into your leverage. If the 90-second rule keeps you afloat through the wave, reframing is how you choose the wind's direction for your sail. You'll still pass through rough waters, but instead of being carried away, you'll steer toward a different destination. Maybe farther, but calmer and worth the trip. Now, even when you've learned to pivot your perspective, there's another danger. Some days, your brain simply refuses to cooperate. It's like a dark room. You know where the light switch is, but your hand just won't reach for it. That's when you need what Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor calls an emergency emotional toolkit. She didn't just study how the brain processes emotions, she lived through a stroke that stripped away all her memory language and emotional regulation. In recovery, she had to create life buoys to keep from sinking into mental chaos. An emotional toolkit isn't a physical box. It's a prepared list. Actions, sounds, images, or people you know can pull you out of a negative spiral. It's something you assemble when you're clear-headed to use, when your mind feels like smashing itself against the wall. Mine has a few items: an old song that reminds me I still have a beating heart, a call to a friend who I know won't say hang in there but will straight up roast me, a book with a folded page I marked 3 years ago. Some people choose a cold shower, others a run. Some just watch a video of their kid laughing. What matters isn't whether the action makes sense to someone else, it's whether it hits the wiring of your nervous system. Picture yourself in the middle of an emotional storm. This toolkit is the emergency eject button. You press it, and you're yanked out of the spiral just long enough to remember every storm passes. And here's what most people miss: you can't wait for the storm to hit before figuring out how to build the house. Your emotional toolkit has to be prepared before you need it. Just like firefighters don't wait for a blaze to hunt for the hose. The key is personalization. If your list includes anything just for show or because it sounds good, it will backfire. This emotional first aid kit is a weapon, and a weapon has to fit your grip. Because when you've hit the ground, you don't need lofty philosophy or an inspiring TED Talk. You need something specific, immediate, and guaranteed to pull you back to solid ground. Your emotional first aid kit is the map you draw for yourself so you don't get lost in your own dark corners. Here's the interesting thing about using your emotional toolkit: sometimes you don't even need the whole box. Just one small action with your own body can be enough to pull you out of a thought spiral. I remember once in New York, crammed into the subway during rush hour. My mind felt like a beehive, buzzing with endless questions and assumptions. I reached for my phone to play some music, but the signal was weak. With no distraction, I decided to try something simple, paying attention to my shoulders. They were tensed up like I was about to fight the whole train car. I let them drop. Then I noticed my chest holding my breath, like bracing for a punch. I exhaled long and slow. My heart was still racing, but just by feeling that heartbeat for a few seconds, everything suddenly slowed down. That's body anchoring, shifting your attention away from the storm in your head and into a physical anchor point. Shoulders, chest, heartbeat, 3 of the easiest entry gates. No analyzing, no judging, just observing. Are my shoulders tight or loose? Chest compressed or open, heart sprinting or walking? And this isn't random. Meditation and yoga have used this principle for thousands of years. When the mind is swept away, bring it back to the body. Modern neuroscience and mindfulness-based stress reduction (MBSR) research show that focusing on physical sensations activates brain regions responsible for present moment awareness, while reducing activity in the default mode network, the part that spins endless stories that stress you out. Put simply, you're turning down the volume of the commentator in your head. You don't need scented candles, meditation music, or a yoga mat to do this. You can body anchor anywhere, in an elevator, in a meeting, or stuck at a red light. Each time you do it, you're laying another brick in the foundation of your calm. And when the next emotional wave hits, you won't get dragged under. You'll have a rope to hold on to, and it starts with your own shoulders. Body anchoring is like grabbing the pool wall when you're struggling to stay afloat. But if you keep letting your mind replay the same old song, sooner or later, you'll let go and drift right back into the whirlpool. That's when you need to learn how to break the negative thought loop. Psychologists call it rumination, chewing on the same thought over and over, usually the worst-case scenario, until it erodes both your mood and your reason. Here's the problem. You can't just order yourself to stop thinking about it. The brain doesn't work that way. Think about it. If I tell you not to think about a white bear, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Exactly, a giant white bear right in the middle of your brain. So instead of shutting down the thought, you need to redirect your attention. One simple yet powerful way is the 5-3-1 technique. 5 is look around and find 5 things you can see. Describe them in detail if possible: a blue chair, a wall with peeling paint light reflecting off the glass door. 3 is listen and identify 3 sounds around you. It could be the hum of the AC, the click of a keyboard, or birds outside the window. 1 is choose one thing you can touch and notice its texture: cold, warm, soft, hard, rough, or smooth. Sounds childish. In reality, this is how you hack your brain's orientation system. By feeding it fresh sensory input, your brain has to allocate resources to process it, cutting off the energy supply that's been fueling your negative thought loop. I tried this technique for the first time during a sleepless night in Chicago. At the time, my mind was like a radio broadcasting only one channel, a list of every mistake I'd ever made in my life. I tried 5-3-1. The result: by the time I focused on the cold ridges of the metal bed frame, my brain felt reset, and I fell asleep without realizing it. This technique doesn't solve the problem instantly, but it severs the bridge between you and the negative loop. And sometimes, that's all you need to get a breath of space before coming back to the problem with a clearer head. If you've ever walked into a room and felt like every single pair of eyes was locked on you, you've experienced the spotlight effect. This is a brain trick that makes us think we're the center of every scene, when in reality, most people are too busy thinking about themselves. Picture yourself standing on a small stage, a spotlight shining directly down. You look out into the audience and believe they're analyzing every detail. Your hair's a little messy, there's a crease in your shirt, your voice is a bit shaky. The truth: each person in the audience is standing on their own stage under their own personal spotlight, thinking exactly the same way about themselves. The spotlight effect has been studied extensively by psychologists. In one famous experiment, college students were asked to wear a t-shirt with singer Barry Manilow's face on it, not exactly a universally beloved choice, and walk into a room full of strangers. When asked afterward, they predicted that about half the people noticed the shirt. Reality only, about 20% even remembered seeing anything on it at all. What does this mean? It means that most of the insecurity, pressure, and embarrassment you feel exists only in the private universe you've imagined. I remember my first time speaking at a conference in Boston. Afterward, I kept thinking everyone would remember the moment I stumbled over my words on slide 3. A week later, I ran into one of the attendees. He said, "Oh, right, you're the guy who talked about marketing strategy, right? I really like the example about the car company." Not a single word about the stumble. Turns out, what I considered a disaster barely registered for anyone else. The spotlight effect is like a mental optical illusion. It magnifies how much attention we think others are giving us, making us believe everyone's keeping score on our every move. In reality, they're all scribbling notes about themselves. So how do you escape this pressure? Remind yourself that people are busy living their own lives. You're not the main character in their story. They have jobs bills, unread messages, and their own worries. Roadshows will flip the lens. Instead of thinking, "What are they thinking about?" try asking, "What can I observe about them?" This shifts you from being the observed to the observer. Deliberately do something awkward. Sometimes owning a small mistake on purpose, like asking someone to repeat a question or laughing when you misspeak, helps you realize that no one cares as much as you think. True freedom comes when you understand that the spotlight doesn't exist. You're in a well-lit room where everyone's moving under their own beam of light, rarely crossing into yours. Marcus Aurelius put it well. You would care less what others think of you if you realized how seldom they do. A simple but sharp reminder: you've built an imaginary arena in your mind and are performing for rows of empty seats. When you switch off that imaginary spotlight, you feel instantly lighter. You can say what you want to say, wear what you like, try a new idea without living as if you're being graded every minute. The spotlight effect is liberation. Not because people will always be kind, but because most of the time, they're too busy playing the lead role in their own play. When you turn off that spotlight, you see that most of the pressure you've felt was just smoke and mirrors. But then there are the real fears, the ones that make you hesitate, stall, or miss opportunities. This is when you bring out a small but deadly weapon. And the question, "What's the worst that could happen?" sounds simple, right? But it's like shining a flashlight under your childhood bed where you thought there was a monster. But it turns out to be just an old pair of socks and a few marbles. Example, you're thinking of quitting your job to switch fields. In your head, it's a horror film, unemployed, homeless, eating raw, instant noodles, sleeping under a bridge. But when you ask, "What's the worst that could happen?" you realize the worst is having to take a temporary job to pay the bills, still far from boiling rainwater for porridge. Or you want to confess your feelings. In your head, they smirk, turn away the whole school or office gossips for a month. In reality, most likely they'll say thanks. But no, and carry on with their life, while you're still allowed to keep living without fleeing to Mexico. The funny thing is, our brains love to cram everything into an apocalypse script. But when you force yourself to write down the actual worst case, you'll see it's rarely a Hollywood disaster. More often, it's just mild discomfort, a bit of embarrassment, or a short period of inconvenience. All survivable. This question doesn't just shrink your fear, it gives you a game plan. If you know the worst you might face, you also know what to prepare for in order to get through it. And that's when you realize most fears are just echoes in a cave, loud, but with no real beast inside. As Epictetus once said, people are not disturbed by things, but by the view they take of them. The question, "What's the worst that could happen?" is how you drag that view into the light to see if it's really as terrifying as you thought. When you finally dare to look straight at the worst, you discover something interesting. Most of what you fear can't kill you. And if it can't kill you, it can make you stronger if you know how to use it. That's the spirit of antifragility, A glass drops and shatters, that's fragile. A rubber ball drops and bounces back, that's resilient. But a body that's been trained, a mind that's been tested, a will that's been sharpened, when they drop, they don't just recover, they come back stronger than before. That's antifragile. We see this principle everywhere. Muscles grow only under load. Bones get denser after controlled impact. The immune system gets stronger after safe exposure to bacteria. The brain works the same way. It learns to handle pressure-solve problems and adapt better when placed in controlled stress situations. The problem is, most people avoid all discomfort like the plague. They find a comfort zone and build walls around it, then wonder why the smallest shock can knock them over. The longer you stay in comfort, the more your mental muscles atrophy. Antifragility doesn't tell you to jump straight into the fire. It tells you to seek out small flames to build heat tolerance. Cold showers in the morning, a 12-hour fast, walking instead of driving, putting your phone away for a weekend, or starting that difficult conversation instead of dodging it. I remember my first winter cold shower. At first, it was a shock, my heart pounding like war drums. But after a few days, my body started to adapt. And it wasn't just the cold water. I found myself less rattled when facing other challenges during the day. It was like my brain had learned, if we can get through this, the rest is nothing. Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who coined the term, said it best: the anti-fragile not only survives chaos, but gets better because of it. If you keep dodging volatility, you're rejecting the very opportunities that make you grow. Anti-fragility turns life into a gym. Every small shock is a set. Every discomfort is a round. And if you train long enough, when the real storm comes, you won't just stand. You'll feel like you were built to walk through it. But here's the funny thing. You can cold shower, fast, run marathons, climb mountains, endure all kinds of controlled stress. And still, when life throws a bucket of cold water in your face without warning, everything you've learned can fly out the window unless you know how to use the Stockdale paradox. If you bring it into everyday life, imagine you're stuck in a terrible job. The overly optimistic person will tell themselves, maybe next month the boss will give me a raise. Then the next month passes, nothing changes. They pin their hopes on the next quarter. And so it goes until they burn out. The person who applies the Stockdale paradox will say, okay, reality is this boss isn't going to change, but I'm certain I can find a better place. And starting tonight, I'm updating my CV and sending it out every evening. It sounds simple, but it requires you to keep the fire of belief without letting it burn you alive with illusions. It's a tightrope walk between hope and reality, and most of us either fall into the pit of disappointment or sink into the swamp of cynicism. I think if Stockdale were alive and making YouTube videos, he'd title one, How to Survive a POW Camp, or a 4-hour company meeting. Because this principle applies to everything from war to financial crisis to waiting for a text from your crush. The key is, you don't have to choose between optimism and realism. You need both. Like wearing a life vest and knowing how to swim, you believe you'll float, but you also know you're in the middle of the ocean. No matter how strong and self-reliant you think you are, when a real crisis hits, losing your job, heartbreak, illness, or some unexpected blow, you'll come to a cold truth. Personal strength matters, but the network of people you can lean on will save you fastest. And that network doesn't have to be huge. In fact, it's best if it's small, 3 to 5 people you trust enough to call immediately when your world falls apart. That group might include Piahugsparu, someone who will give you blunt advice, even if you don't like hearing it. Nakakist, someone who can calm you down, not spiral with you. Biawandis Tirom, someone who can give practical help, anything from a temporary place to stay to job connections, to just handing you a cup of coffee when you've got nothing left. For example, when Mark, a friend I know in New York, lost his job right in the middle of winter, he had no family nearby. But he had his group of 3. One helped him rewrite his resume, one dragged him out to exercise instead of staying in bed, and one lent him a room for 2 weeks. Result, within a month, he had a new job, while many in the same situation were still floundering. The thing is, you only get real strength from these connections if you've invested in them beforehand. You can't just show up when you need something and disappear when you're fine. This 3-5 person group exists because both sides know. When I fall, they'll catch me. When they fall, I'll be there. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "We were born to work together, like the left hand and the right hand. You can live alone, but you'll recover much faster if there are hands ready to pull you up when you slip." So if you don't know your 3-5, yet start building it today. Don't wait for the crisis to start looking, because when the storm hits, that's the time to drop anchor, not to build the boat. You've just walked through 20 principles, each one a tool, a piece of armor. On their own, they're just tips. But combined, they form a personal resilience system that helps you not only survive crisis, but walk out of it stronger. Final words. There will be moments when life blindsides you, without warning, a message that makes your heart drop a twist that sweeps away your plans a day when everything turns against you. You can't choose when the storm comes, but you can choose how you stand in it. And in the moment you control your response, you'll realize you've changed. Resilience doesn't just appear. It's built from every time you took a deep breath, instead of exploding from every time you faced the truth, instead of numbing yourself from every time you acted, while fear still sat in your chest. Each time you forged another layer of antifragility, so that when the big waves hit, you don't just stand firm, you know how to ride them forward. Seneca once said, "It's not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It's because we do not dare that they are difficult." Today you've got what you need to dare to take pressure to change, to walk through your darkest days while keeping a spark for yourself. And when that moment comes, when you need it most, what you've heard today will find its way back to you. If this video gave you a tool worth keeping, leave a comment, not just for me to read, but so anyone stumbling here can find the light. Hit like, share it with the friend you think needs it, and subscribe to keep these principles close. Because next time life tests you, you won't just survive. You'll walk out as if the storm was just your morning warm-up.